To that report that from NBC, 3 current, 7 former Fox employees telling NBC News Pete Hegseth would drink in ways that concerned his colleagues. 2 said he smelled of alcohol before going on the air as a co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend more than a dozen times. NBC News reports 3 current employees said his drinking remained a concern up until Trump announced him as his choice to run the Pentagon, at which point Hegseth left Fox. For the sake of national security, I really hope he has stopped drinking, one of the former Fox employees said. He should not be Secretary of Defense, another former Fox employee said. His drinking should be disqualifying, end quote. This follows a report from the New Yorker earlier this week that detailed accusations of impropriety and drunkenness that led to Hegseth's ouster from 2 top veterans groups nearly a decade ago. Spokesperson for the Trump transition tells NBC News these disgusting allegations are completely unfounded and false, and anyone peddling these defamatory lies to score political cheap shots is sickening. As a decorated combat veteran, Pete has never done anything to jeopardize that, and he's treating his nomination as the most important deployment of his life. Hegseth's lawyer referred NBC to the Trump team statement, and Fox News did not respond to requests for comment. Joining us now, NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube, one of the reporters who broke the allegations about those concerns over Pete Hegseth's drinking. So, Courtney, you have 10, I believe, sources on this story. This is not just one person leaking something out to you. Tell us more about what you found in your reporting.
Yeah, and I have to say, we worked on this, our colleagues Chloe Mellis and Sarah Fitzpatrick and I worked on this for several weeks. This wasn't the story that just came up. We spoke with more people even than are reflected in the story. And these aren't people who are out to necessarily, criticize Fox News. Consistently, we were talking to current and former Fox News employees who were concerned about Pete Hegseth's qualifications for such an enormous job at leading the Department of Defense. So, as you mentioned, Willie, 10 current and former colleagues from Fox News who told us about this pattern of behavior over the course of years, where Pete Hegseth would repeatedly show up, sometimes moments before the 6 a.m. show would start on the weekend morning, and he would talk sometimes about being hungover, about how he had barely slept or not slept at all because he'd been out all night, he'd been out partying, and oftentimes he would even come in and they could still smell the alcohol from the night before. So coming in still with some of the aftermath from his night before being out drinking. In addition to that, we also spoke with colleagues who were at social events with him, Fox News social events, where they would see him overindulging. So candidly, it was behavior that is reminiscent of that New Yorker article that you mentioned of him overindulging in alcohol at official events with colleagues, and at times behaving in ways that was embarrassing or not necessarily befitting of the leader of an organization. You guys are all on shows. You know how this goes. When the host or the anchor of a show shows up only moments before broadcast, before you go on the air, it puts a lot of stress on the staff, on the show, on the producers. And that was what we consistently heard here, was that this behavior really caused angst and concern. And yes, while we are talking for the most part about a period of several years ago before he moved to Tennessee, we did also speak with colleagues who said this continued to be a concern, his drinking, up until he terminated his contract with Fox News on November 12th, when Donald Trump, President-elect Trump, named him as his Secretary of Defense. A consistent thing that we heard throughout the course of the several weeks that we reported out this story, Willie, was the concerns about his character here. And one thing I have really been struck by was when Hegseth was first named several weeks ago, there was a lot of talk about the policies that he could come in and implement as the Secretary of Defense. We heard a lot about his feelings that women should no longer serve in combat positions. What could happen potentially with transgender individuals who are serving in the military, serving openly right now. The conversation has really shifted over those weeks to concerns about his character. The drinking has been one, his treatment of women has been another. And as you mentioned, it has really been a nearly daily drip, drip, drip of additional allegations and accusations. That's why, as you were talking about, there seemed to be this increasing concern among Republican senators who candidly would usually support President-elect Trump's nominees.
All right, NBC's Courtney Kube, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Let's bring in Admiral Stavridis. Admiral, you know, we always talk about how two things can be true at one time. So let's walk through this for a second on a human level. Everything that we've read about Pete Hegseth and his first tours in combat zones suggests that he did a great job, honorable, and in uniform, was respected by those around him in his early tours. We also know, though, a lot of men and women come back from war zones, and perhaps they have PTSD. I'm not suggesting that's the case here. I don't know what the case is here, but it is very obvious by seeing the pattern of behavior since he returned from the combat that he obviously needs help. I mean, if you even just read what his mother wrote, and I know that now she's trying to be a good mom and trying to defend her son after that's out, but what she wrote lines up with what people said before, during, and now after. So this appears to be, and I think the Trump transition team believes this appears to be a man who needs help and not the nuclear codes.
Yeah, I think we talked about that earlier in the week on exactly that point. I think there's three baskets of problems here. Number one, which we've talked about quite a bit this morning, the kind of character issues. That email from his mother is heartbreaking to read. Then there's the policy issues. I don't see how you become the Secretary of Defense of an organization that's 20% women in virtually every combat role. And by the way, I've commanded thousands of women in combat since I was a commander in the Navy, a commodore, an admiral at sea in Afghanistan. Women fight well in combat. I've seen it again and again. You can't go into the building, the Pentagon, with that kind of a stance that women should be pulled out of the force. So there's a policy basket. And then third, I think, and finally here, it's the size, the scope, the scale of running the Pentagon. The place is 3 million people, active and reserve, budget of 800, 900 billion. The people we need at that desk, I'll give you one Republican and one Democrat. Robert Gates headed the CIA, was Secretary of Defense I worked directly for. Leon Panetta, Democrat, Chief of Staff in the White House. These are the kind of serious people we need running the Pentagon. So I think Hegseth's nomination is in big trouble. I'll close with this. You talked about Pete Hegseth's combat record. I respect that. There are other options out there. And if you look at Ron DeSantis, he also served in combat. He was the Navy JAG advising Navy SEALs in the Middle East. His combat record is just fine, but he's pretty clean on the other issues of character we talked about.
So, Richard, Pete Hegseth has said in the past, in a book he wrote and in multiple interviews, this was not a one-off, a mistake that women should not serve in combat, calling them, quote, a distraction. He was asked about that yesterday. Do you think they should be in combat? Talking about women, he said, I think they're already in combat. That's maybe he doesn't want them to be, but they're already there. What's he going to do about it? We heard Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday, probably, as Joe said, a lagging indicator, saying this is going to be very difficult for Pete Hegseth. I have a lot of questions for him about his behavior, about his past. Where do you see this headed?
Oh, it's clear where it's heading. There's a precedent for this. People forget George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president. Who was his first choice to be Secretary of Defense? John Tower. He had problems, if I recall, the phrase was with the beverage alcohol. And who became Dick Cheney, became Secretary of Defense. So the idea that you would have someone who has these personal issues in such a critical role, it's not going to happen. Second of all, if it is Ron DeSantis or anybody, let me say, Willie, the idea that the biggest problem facing the American military is wokeness is preposterous. That's not on the top 10, not on the top 50, not on the top 100. We got real issues. And by the way, it goes beyond the fact that there may be bloat in the budget. We've also got we've got an inadequate budget. We're facing challenges in 3 geographies. This is a time of great technological innovation. You've got China, Russia, North Korea, Iran in some ways aligning. So yes, there's bloat in the Pentagon budget. We're spending too much in some cases on the wrong systems. But this is a very powerful case that this needs to be a time of great innovation and actually expansion of what we spend on defense, given what's going on in the world geopolitically and in the world of technology.
You know, Caddy K, yesterday when Lindsey Graham came out and talked about all the problems that he was having, you know, obviously there's the fact that he's just not qualified to run a bureaucracy that large. There also, of course, were the drinking problems, the character problems, his mother talking about his abuse of women, the allegations there. But this is what struck me about Lindsey Graham's statement, and it was almost like he was channeling Joni Ernst and other women who are Republicans who give a damn about the DOD and about women in the military. Lindsey said this, Senator Graham said this: leadership comes at the top, and I want to make sure that every young woman who joins the military feels respected. That's and Joni Ernst also said we're going to have a really frank and thorough conversation. But again, Lindsey Graham, a conservative from South Carolina, saying we want to make sure every young woman entering the military feels respected. That really does sound like one of the final straws there.